and I'm the Head of Land Management with Borders Forest Trust. It's great to be invited to share with you today some of our work on woodland and peatland restoration. Borders Forest Trust is a regional native woodland charity working towards restoring native woodlands and associated natural habitats in the south of Scotland, and also to rekindle a woodland culture within the community that lives here. We were established in 1996 to bring back native woodlands to this part of Scotland. This area of Scotland has one of the lowest land covers of native woodland in the entire country, with only around 4% of land area under native trees. We've been working to address this issue, and over the last 28 years, we've planted over 2 million trees in the south of Scotland and are beginning to make a real difference. The work of the Trust spans across the Scottish borders and into Dumfries and Galloway, and the main focus of our ecological restoration work is in the Wild Heart, and this is what I'll be talking to you about today. The Wild Heart comprises 4 sites in the central southern upland hills of Scotland that are owned by Borders Forest Trust. These are shown here in the map and are, in order of purchase, the Carafran Wildwood, and to the west of that is Corehead, shown in red. To the north of Carafran is the Talland Gameshope, shown in blue, and just beside Corehead is in pink is Ericstane, which we recently purchased last year. Collectively, these sites cover around 3,250 hectares, which is enabling us to work on a landscape scale to restore native woodlands and other natural habitats across these upland hills and valleys. Native woodland restoration is the primary focus of our efforts when we acquire land. Planning how to do this takes some time before the first trees are actually planted. We're working in an area virtually devoid of native trees, other than the occasional rowan that's clinging on to inaccessible places where browsing mouths cannot reach. You can see an example of this in one of the photos on the slide, as well as the bare ground behind it. As a result of the lack of trees, tree planting is essential, as we cannot rely on natural regeneration alone to reforest the land and also to bring back the full complement of species of tree that would be there naturally. To make sure we get the right tree in the right place, we undertake national vegetation classification surveys to identify suitable planting ground and to inform what type of woodland and tree species to plant. From there, we source funding for the planting, predominantly from woodland grant schemes, which means we have to follow the specifications of the grant, so we usually plant at densities of around 1,600 stems a hectare. The grant schemes usually fund somewhere between 60 and 70% of the cost, depending on whether or not deer fencing is involved, and we sell the carbon associated with the planting to make the planting financially viable. Without this, it would be a real struggle, and this is actually what the carbon market was intended for, so it's good to make good use of it. We also plant in other areas that are suitable for planting but don't meet the requirements of forestry grants. For example, areas where there's an abundance of unplantable ground, such as scree, wet flushes and blanket bogs, we would like to plant with clumps and pockets in between those, and we fund those by other means such as corporate donations, tree sponsorships and other grant funding such as lottery and charitable trusts, and we also work with volunteers quite extensively in these areas to carry out the planting. The aim is to establish diverse native woodlands which will be self-sustaining in perpetuity through the process of natural regeneration. And to do this, we need to establish the first generation of trees, which in the uplands can be a bit of a challenge and a slow process. We have predominantly flat planted in the past with a good screef to reduce the vegetation competition. We found this works fairly well on the poorer soils. However, where there are richer soils with stronger grasses and areas of bracken, we have more recently opted for inverted mounding, as we no longer use chemical weeding as pre-planting preparation. Over the years, we've tried a number of different protection methods to stop voles, hares and deer from nibbling away at the trees. We currently use volgars in the grassy areas and 0.6 metre tubes on the dense bracken areas. This helps to support the growth of the trees through the bracken and prevents them from being pushed over when the bracken goes down at the end of the season. We are now committed to using non-plastic protection, which has been a real challenge, and there have been a number of disappointments along the way, as we haven't yet found a reliable product, but we remain hopeful as the market develops. We're very fortunate not to have red deer in the south of Scotland, but we do have abundant roe deer, and on some of the sites, sika as well. We've deer fenced in the most remote areas, which we did not feel we could undertake appropriate levels of deer management on. But across the whole site, we do undertake rigorous deer control, and we cull around 90 deer a year to achieve a density of between 2 and 4 deer per kilometre square. A recent study in the Cairngorms has shown that natural regeneration is achievable where deer density of 4 deer per kilometre square is achieved. So if we can maintain this level across our sites, we'll be supporting natural regeneration in the longer term. We've already seen a range of natural regeneration happening at the Carafran Wildwood, which is very heartening, and the few aspen that we have had have sent out lots of suckers, and they are establishing well, indicating that we're getting it right with the deer management. It's amazing to see that what can be achieved in a relatively short scale of just 25 years. The Carafran Wildwood was the first site that we bought and is our flagship project, and the first tree was planted here on the 1st of January in the year 2000. Since then, over 700,000 trees have been planted, and a native woodland is now flourishing with natural regeneration evident across the site. The two pictures will show you before and after. This is what a lot of the hills and the southern uplands look like, bare as a result of centuries of sheep grazing, and now you can see it clothed again in native woodland. Our survivor rowan tree was an inspiration for the project, which aimed to restore the native woodland that would have existed there 6,000 years ago, before humans became dominant in a landscape. We hoped that where one tree survived, 1 million trees would grow. And we're now getting close to that number, but we're not there yet, so the work continues. Moving up the hills above the native woodland planting, we've been working on the restoration of montane scrub, which is also known as mountain woodland. This is a nationally rare habitat of high conservation interest in the UK and is found in only a small number of places above where the tree line would naturally sit, and they form scrubby willow, juniper and dwarf birch communities. Montane scrub is not very photogenic, as you can see from these pictures, I'm afraid. Our site manager, Chris, there is getting very excited with some well-established juniper and dwarf birch just in front of him there. And the other shrubs that you can see there are willows that were planted about 10 years ago. But you can see how high up we're planting. The planter in the bottom right-hand corner is about 640 metres. So it takes a good bit of effort to get up there and plant. In the wild heart, we have even less montane scrub species than we had native trees. So again, planting has been necessary to restore this valuable habitat. Given the lack of parent plants in the area, it's a challenge to find suitable planting stock of local provenance. So we often have to look out with the south of Scotland to source some of the shrubs that we plant. This is not ideal for ecological reasons. However, when you think about it in the longer term, it might be better to have greater genetic diversity to help them be more resilient against climate change, because we don't know where that will go. Growing at altitude in quite tough conditions, it can be slow to establish trees, but we do now have flowering willows above 650 metres, from which we can collect seed for future plantings and further our work. Involving people is a key part of the work of Borders Forest Trust. It's so much more about than just getting trees in the ground and establishing woodland. We really want to involve people in this process, and to do this, we support a range of volunteering opportunities in the Wild Heart. These are mostly tree planting, and hundreds of people join us every year to do this. We want people to feel connected to the land and involved in the process of restoring habitats that support more wildlife and are good for the environment. The Wild Heart contains significant amounts of blanket bog peatland. When we bought the sites, these peatlands ranged in condition from completely intact healthy bogs to exposed eroding peat hags and areas of significant drainage. We began peatland restoration at Carafran 10 years ago, focusing on the most exposed area of peat hags at Little Firthope. At this time, low interventional approaches were generally being used, so powered by volunteers and the site officer, work was undertaken to dam gullies and install geotextile membrane across bare areas of peat and to top it with sphagnum and cotton grass. While this approach worked in the least exposed areas, it was not very successful on the whole, and the peatland continued to erode in many places. Of significant concern was the threat that erosion would cause a bog pool to be drained and the loss of a rare local population of bog blaeberry. The two pictures at the bottom show the nice bog pool, and the distance behind it are the diggers working away on peatland restoration. And to the bottom right, you've got a small population of the bog blaeberry that's clinging on to a hag that looks like it's just about to be eroded away. And you can see the extent of the erosion in the gully where the man is standing next to some hags. And then you can see some before and after pictures going from bare peat to revegetated peat. Some of the less hagged areas at Carafran and the interestingly named Rotten Bottom blanket bog had naturally recovered following the cessation of grazing, but there's still a significant erosion happening in larger peat hags. Survey work was carried out looking at the peat depths, and at the same time BFT had purchased the neighbouring site at Peatland Gameshope, which contained numerous areas of blanket bog, many in a poor eroding condition. After seeking advice from peatland action officers working at the Tweed Forum that were funded by Nature Scots Peatland Action Fund, plans were made to tackle the most accessible of these areas, to block drains and to reprofile peat hags, and to see how effective it was. It's no mean feat to get diggers out on site, even in the most accessible areas. So we continued to work on the trials to see how effective they would be, and we've now reprofiled and revegetated over 100 hectares of peatland on Carafran and Peatland Gameshope. Getting it right has been a bit of a challenge, and it's taken quite a number of years to get us through the process. Securing funding on the necessary timescale was a big issue because that had to happen in order for us to enable good contractors which book up quickly because there's not that many of them. Then trying to get the work done before the hard winter sets in can be a bit of a challenge. And also we have to do it before the end of March when ground nesting bird season starts. It took a number of attempts to get all the stars aligned to enable us to get the work completed in the most remote parts of the site. You can see the picture of the diggers here that are sat at 650 metres above sea level, and they sat there in the snow for 2 months before they were able to be got out and sledged down the hill back to the road. And then it cost us an extra £1,500 to remobilise them and get them back out into site in September. So funding is a major part of making it happen. Funding was a blend of Nature Scot Peatland Action Grant funding and private sector carbon sales from emission reductions. We used brokers to manage the sales for us, which meant that we did not have to deal with finding buyers, negotiating sales and undertaking the validation and verification, but it also meant that we sold at a lower price than we would have got if we'd sold directly. We are a small team and simply haven't got the capacity to do this. So by not getting involved in the sales process, it enabled us to fully focus on actually getting the work done. We didn't sell the carbon from the most degraded area at Little Firthope for fear that it wouldn't be successful. The site is now looking good, however, and the carbon has been registered, so we should be able to sell the carbon from the peatland restoration works should it continue to hold in the future. Again, we're lucky not to have high numbers of deer to contend with on site, as these cause erosion. So once restored, these habitats shall thrive and support wildlife and continue to store carbon. This video shows part of the process of reprofiling and revegetating. First, the digger works on the bare peat to reprofile the slope and to lessen the angle of the hag to reduce future erosion. The digger then covers the bare peat with vegetation cut from the nearby borrow pit. That's what we're seeing in the video here. The vegetation that's dug out of the borrow pit is a combination of sphagnum bog and cotton grass species, as well as other species found on blanket bogs. And the borrow pits are smoothed over and the vegetation spread out there to prevent there being big holes left in the habitat. It needed 2 diggers, one to cut the borrow pit vegetation out and one to spread it, which is incredible to see how refined they can be with such big buckets. Having two diggers was also a good idea in case one needed to help the other one out, because it's very easy to get stuck in a bog and not very easy to send in a rescue vehicle when you're about 5 kilometres in a big blanket bog at 650 metres above sea level. It's amazing to watch them operate, and it's incredible the difference it can be made in such a short period of time, going from bare peat to revegetated, healthy blanket bog. It doesn't take long for the roots to establish into the bare peat, and it's a very effective way of restoring peatland. So this has been a whistle-stop tour of native woodland, montane scrub and peatland restoration work that Borders Forest Trust has been carrying out in our Wild Heart. So far we've planted over 850 hectares of native woodland and are restoring over 120 hectares of peatland. So what's next for us? We want to establish those trees that we've planted, but we're also looking ahead to the future and further planting. We're looking to plant up the next phase of tall and game soap, which is shown in the map below in pink, which will connect into existing planting that we've already done, which is shown in green, and also help to link up to the montane scrub woodland, which you can see outlined in purple. The peatland restoration is pretty much complete, but we'll keep an eye on it to see whether or not any further erosion happens, and if necessary, we'll get diggers back out to deal with that. We're also looking to develop planting plans for Ericstein, which is in the southwest of Corehead. And we're looking at a 60-hectare planting grant there under forestry grant schemes. So I hope you've enjoyed finding out a bit about Borders Forest Trust today. You're very welcome to come and visit us at Carafran, as I believe there's a field visit associated with this conference. So hopefully some of you will book onto that and we'll get to meet you in person. So thanks very much for listening. It's been a pleasure. Goodbye.